For my first entry in my social change journal, I'll be discussing how women were highlighted at the recent COP26 United Nations Climate Summit. And this is important because women are at an increased risk for facing detrimental effects due to climate change, such as being pulled out of school early or being married early. And there were organizations present at this conference that were working with women and girls to educate them about the effects of climate change while trying to mitigate the effects it has on the world and on them at the same time. And this is considered social change because it reflects how such a large entity like the UN can work with women and girls as well as different organizations to help support these people while fighting damages that happen because of climate change. And then a common theme within all of these initiatives was a focus on education. So it educated women and girls about climate change, how it impacts them, and what they can do to help fight climate change, especially in regions where this education may not necessarily be available to them in an appropriate amount. And both these organizations and these women and girls are impacted by this social change. And this is because the organizations are getting exposure and they're also receiving credibility through their efforts, while women and girls are learning new things about climate change and what they can do to help be agents of change when fighting climate change. And I think that this change is positive because climate change is a growing problem and people need to recognize that climate change is not really going away and that it's going to be a pressing issue even in the future. And the change is also positive because it's focusing on women empowerment. And I think that that's really important to not only the health of women, but in general to benefiting the society. And it also shows women and girls that they're able to make a better future through advocacy and science. And I think this is inspirational not just to the women and girls directly affected by the organization, but to people around the country or around the world. But there are some pitfalls that could happen from this change, including increased violence, especially in countries where women and girls are not recognized as equal to men and who do not necessarily have the same educational resources as men because of this power dynamic. And the fact that they're advocating for a better future for themselves can also be problematic just because they don't have the same rights as other men in these countries. So that can pose issues for them and for their work in the future. For my second entry in my social change journal, I will be discussing a little story I found about how members inside and outside of the LGBTQ community are working to help LGBTQ elders who may not have access to certain resources or caregivers that will give them the proper attention that they need. And this is an example of social change because it shows how people within and outside of the LGBTQ community are working together to just support others in general, regardless of their different backgrounds or walks of life. And those working to help these LGBTQ elders who do not have access to certain resources or things that can help them just lead better lives and have a better quality of life, or who face discrimination because of the ways that they identify, shows how these parties can strive to reach a common goal through understanding their different perspectives and experiences, regardless of where they come from. And people are making this change by facilitating training programs that specifically focus on caring for elderly LGBTQ individuals, as well as creating education programs, providing them food and shelter and hygiene supplies, and just in general supporting the LGBTQ elders and meeting with them in times of need. And I think both those who are on the receiving end of the change and those who are creating the change are being benefited, and this is because they're learning about LGBTQ causes and what the LGBTQ community goes through in terms of their inequalities and discrimination, and they're trying to mitigate these effects of this discrimination and to help these people out. And they're also just in general giving education and receiving education, so they're both benefited. And I think that the change being made is most definitely positive because just assisting people in general is something that everybody should be involved in. and it helps to recognize the experiences of those within the LGBTQ community. And it's really important when it comes to the elderly population who might not have those resources, like in general. So it's really good that they're supporting them. And I think that one potential pitfall could be that there could be a rise in discrimination against elderly LGBTQ members. And because there would be an increased focus on this group of people, more people might feel as if they can discriminate against them or say mean things about them because of the way that they identify. And also, people who are supporting the community could be affected just because of a negative stigma or stereotype against these people in general could be cast upon them as well. For my third social change journal entry, I'll be discussing how community members and student leaders within the Iowa County School District are standing up for minority students in light of recent racial attacks and recent discrimination within the district's public schools. And also, students are holding walkouts and protests, and they're making surveys and inquiries to help these students out and to try and see how they can best support minority students. And this is social change because students and community members, as well as school officials, are all coming together to make a change for youth within these schools. And not only does this impact those students directly within the school district, but it also impacts students across the country because they're able to see how these efforts are playing out in one place, and it can inspire both students and adults to take action in other places to combat racism and injustice wherever they see it. And these students serve as an inspiration to others just to get involved in whatever causes that they think they can help in relating to these issues. And people are making change by hosting community meetings with school officials about the pressing issue of racism that's seen within schools. And students are taking action by themselves by protesting these injustices, so hosting walkouts and gathering their peers to help protest these problems. And these are actually catching the media's attention. And they're planning on making change by working directly with minority communities, both the students and the adults, within the school district, just to fully support these students and make them feel as if they're not alone and that they can reach out to people when they need help. And I think that the change being made is definitely a positive change. And this is because I believe that all students deserve to feel safe and comfortable within their schools. And through supporting minority students, especially, and reprimanding or punishing students who are exhibiting these racial misconduct behaviors, it shows that the community actually cares for these students and wants to see a change within these communities to help them out. And they're also working on educating others about racism and prejudice too, and how unjust it actually is. But a potential drawback could be that's created from this change could be that there would be opposition to supporting these minority students from just in general prejudiced and racist people, and they may wrongfully believe that it would be inappropriate to offer support to these students when you're not offering it to other kinds of students as well, and then this could serve an even greater disconnect and discrimination to minority communities. For my fourth entry in my social change journal, I'll be discussing how students at Kokomo High School are protesting against discriminatory dress code in their school, especially towards girls. And because students were alarmed by the rate at which females were getting dress coded or getting in trouble for what they were wearing to school more than males, this led them to hosting protests and contacting school officials to try and advocate for girls at the school. And so this is an example of social change because students are taking a proactive stance to try and help their classmates fight this discriminatory dress code. And they're not just focusing on females being advocates, but also males too. So they want everybody to participate in walkouts and protests that they're hosting. And even their parents are getting involved, and they're bringing it to the attention of school officials and the media. So this shows how this is not only involving the school itself, but there's implications outside of the school, because people can be inspired by what's going on. And surely this issue is not just in this school, it happened in my high school. So it allows people to see that they can stand up for what they think is right, especially in schools where students are considered to not have as much power as adults. So it just serves as an inspiration to help others advocate for what they believe in. And so people are making this change in the school through hosting walkouts, protests, and just in general educating about the school's dress code to other students. And they're also holding meetings with school officials and the school district, as well as getting the media's attention to try and fix this problem. And I think that those who are creating change and those who are receiving the change are both benefiting from this, because both those who are creating the change and those who are benefiting are basically in the same group. So those who are creating the change are learning how to be advocates. They're helping their fellow classmates out. It has greater implications on the rest of the country, as I mentioned before. So these people would be receiving a benefit, and also those who are receiving the change would be in general getting a less discriminatory dress code, which is a major benefit. And I think that the change is positive. And as a girl who was dress coded in my high school, and I had several friends who were dress coded in high school because of what we were wearing, and it was really for no reason, students taking action against these practices is definitely positive, and it shows how youth can be catalysts for change, not just in their communities, but also outside. And pitfalls could be that students would be reprimanded by their schools for going against the school policy, and students can become maybe distracted with their advocacy efforts as they focus more on that and less on the schoolwork at hand. But there's always an appropriate balance between the two.